Texas cities. I'd like to start by addressing the League's position on some of the affordable housing issues that are out there, and I know that my colleagues up here all can speak in more detail on a lot of these issues than I can, but I know that this is a issue of significant importance to this committee. It's undoubtedly a huge issue for Texas cities as well, and many cities have made increasing affordable housing a top priority in their communities. The role of cities with regard to low-income housing tax credits and resolutions at the city level is worthy of examination. I know in the interim report that y'all kind of signaled that as an important priority of the committee. Many cities have adopted very specific policies regarding how cities are to score applications and support certain projects in accordance with TDHCA rules. City government is often where the rubber meets the road on a lot of these projects, because the city government is the one closest to the people and is in, I think, a good position to balance the needs and the priorities of having increased affordable housing with concerns from the citizens, legitimate concerns regarding neighborhoods and communities within those cities. Cities do have differing opinions on how to handle that process and on their role in the tax credit process. While I'll take their role seriously, some prioritize their specific role more than others. In reality, there are probably some cities who would just as soon be out of the process, in much the same way that the Senate was removed from the process a couple sessions ago. But that's not true across the board. There may be some cities that feel that way. There's others that really value their role in that process and approving those tax credits or submitting resolutions on those tax credits. So because of that difference in opinion, the League has generally taken no position and been neutral on how cities might be impacted in that process. And that's traditionally been where we've come down on it, and we'll see moving forward with what gets filed, but has been our position. That being said, the League definitely supports city governments to continue their critical role in promoting affordable housing, and we do generally support keeping all options on the table for local governments to promote affordable housing. If I could, just before I turn it over to my colleagues here, mention a couple other issues of importance to cities this session. More than anything, the League will be seeking to preserve city authority to address local issues in accordance with what citizens want from their government, and that includes opposing attempts to cap budgets for Texas cities regarding public safety, infrastructure, economic development in ways that we think wouldn't provide any real significant tax relief. I realize that this committee will not be taking up that legislation, but I mention it because the impact of that legislation will affect in the future much of what this committee considers. For instance, public safety makes up the majority of city budgets, especially with larger cities. And limiting budgetary discretion for cities will undoubtedly impact the ability to hire more personnel, and increase salaries, upgrade technology, and outdated equipment for those cities. On the point of transportation infrastructure, as you know, cities have a huge responsibility to help maintain roads and transit systems in some of the fastest growing areas in the country. This isn't just limited to city streets. Cities actually give more than $100 million to TxDOT each year in the form of cash and more in right-of-way donations and in-kind services for local participation on highway projects. We do oppose efforts to require cities to pitch in more for that. One example of where this has been an issue for us is with legislation that would require cities to reimburse TxDOT for compensation paid to billboard owners in condemnation proceedings. Representative Elkins, I know you carried a bill that we worked with you on a couple of sessions ago related to billboard regulations, and I believe that's that's a bill that may be looked at by this committee. The one final issue I'll just mention is related to general law sex offender ordinances. There is legislation this session that I believe has been referred to this committee that would clarify general law cities' authority to adopt sex offender residency regulations. We are very supportive of that legislation, just in the interest of having smaller communities clearly be able to adopt those regulations to protect children within their community. So we very much look forward to working with the committee on all of these issues, and be happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Thank you. I recognize that we've been joined by Chairman Elkins. Next we'll have Bobby Boland. We're going to let all four speak, and then we'll have questions. If you hear a beeping sound, that's just letting you know your time's coming up. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am Bobby Bowling. I'm a builder and developer from El Paso. I'm also serving currently as the president of the Texas Affiliation of Affordable Housing Providers. Our trade group basically represents the tax credit industry in the state of Texas. We probably got 90% or so of the players in the industry as members of our organization. We have over 300 members, so from all different aspects. There's developers, lenders, investors, accountants, specialty lawyers in our group. I appreciate also the opportunity to testify before you. I was very active in the interim at the House Urban Affairs interim hearings. I applaud the report that came out of that. Our number one issue that's going to come before you this session is, as Mr. Longley alluded to in the beginning of his testimony, is to remove the political process from the elected official input into what we call our QAP, which is basically the rules of the tax credit program. We're the only state, we've done some research, we're the only state in the United States that's actually giving points for elected officials. Elected officials in other states and throughout the program all around the country are encouraged to participate, but this is the only state in the United States that effectively gives elected officials, both state reps and municipalities, a veto power. So we put together an application, and nothing else matters if we're not able to procure the letter of support from the state rep or the municipality. It's a lot of money we've spent. It's a lot of effort we put in for it all just to boil down to those two items. They're the highest scoring, the municipality, other than feasibility, which everybody meets when they put in their application pretty much. The municipality point item is the number one item. I wanted to bring your attention to, we provided you all with a handout. There's an IRS ruling that came out after the conclusion of your interim hearings that I think is very important on this subject matter. It's IRS Revenue Ruling 2016-29, and it came out at the very end of December, like Christmas week or right before New Year's. And there's some compelling things in here, and it's a pretty far-reaching IRS ruling in that it's addressing some policy issues primarily. And if you flip to the first page of page 2, it talks about an agency, a housing credit agency in State X. Well, State X is clearly Texas. There is no other state in the United States that's following the scheme that they lay out in this ruling. It talks about points granted to projects that, and then they have the 3 bullet points that we're trying to address this session. Manifest community participation with neighborhoods, receive a commitment of development funding by local political subdivision or support, and receive community support for the application as evidenced by a written statement from the state legislature in the district which the project is proposed to be developed. And I know you, Representative Leach, have some filed legislation that addresses that specifically, and we're wholeheartedly in agreement with your efforts on that. It's, again, highlighted in the interim report. I was at every one of those hearings. There was nothing but comment and testimony for taking those letters out. There was no one who provided testimony saying that those are a good idea to keep them in. So again, we wholeheartedly support your effort on that. Flipping through this, I'd just like to point out a little bit more of the language that's in here. On page 3, there's some language that says that the the letters requiring local approval empowers jurisdictions to exercise what some call a local veto. That's exactly what I'm testifying to today, that's a problem. In State X, again, Texas, local approval is much more likely to be secured for proposed LIHTC tax credit developments in areas with greater proportions of minority residents and fewer economic opportunities than in higher opportunity non-minority communities. And so basically, if you read this whole 5 or 6 page ruling, they're basically sending out a message. This is an IRS program, and they're basically saying that the way Texas is doing it is calling into question the legality and its auspices to do what we're doing in Texas and still not violate the Fair Housing Act. So I want to make sure that everybody understands Texas is the only state doing this, and it's an IRS federal program. And I know, I'm a pretty conservative businessman, and a lot of things that Washington does and a lot of things they come down with, we say, well, that's just crazy Washington. But on this instance, I want to make sure everyone's aware. I mean, there's a possibility that we're jeopardizing our funding from this IRS program when they put out an aggressive ruling like this that's tailor-made to address what's going on in Texas. I had the opportunity to go to the Texas Municipal League conference this last, the end of summer, early fall, and I was on a panel that was speaking exactly to this, along with Chairwoman Alvarado was on the panel as well. And again, we took a lot of feedback. It was a full room. It was an auditorium. No one was standing up saying, yes, keep us in this. We likened it, and we used an analogy of, TxDOT determines where highways are going to go in the state of Texas. The Bureau of Corrections, or whatever that agency is that determines where prisons are. If there were state reps and municipalities that got to weigh in 4 points on those processes, we wouldn't have any highways in Texas, and we wouldn't have any prisons in Texas. And so what I'm telling you is this is getting worse and worse every year. We're just finishing up our cycle. Our applications are due March 1st, and the anecdotal stories that I've heard from my colleagues are at an all-time high with the kind of political finagling that's going on with these letters and these municipal letters of support. It's so difficult, and we're getting to a point where it's almost going to be some regions of the state are just going to go without affordable housing. And this is a fantastic program. It's exactly the kind of stuff that I, as a Texas business person, applaud. It's a private program. The government's got very limited involvement. We bring in private investors from around the country, private lenders, and we're helping working class Texans. It's not a welfare program. It's not a, you've got to have a job, you've got to have income, and it's a tool whereby people can work their way up through the lower class and get into the American dream of home ownership. And I'll close with this. We've had the opportunity, I've been in this program now for 17 years, and we've taken 35 of our tenants and sold them homes from my home building company. And this is a great program, and I'd hate to see it go away because of this kind of political thing that we insist that we have in the statute dictating to the QAP. So, thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you. Lisa Stevens.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing us to come and speak to you this morning. My name is Lisa Stevens. I am the president of the Texas Coalition of Affordable Developers. We are a fairly select group, primarily developers and folks who make their living here in Texas providing affordable housing. We have over 200 years of collective experience. We've generated among our group almost 40,000 units of affordable housing through the TDHCA program. We represent both for-profits and nonprofits, as well as rural and urban areas. So we cover a huge sector of the state with our group. Our TexCAD was formed in order to focus on policy issues that are industry-wide, not those that refer to a specific developer, development type, or area of the state. We're looking at areas that are industry-wide, and obviously this issue that Bobby's touched on today is one that affects all of us in the industry. I'm going to put some numbers on what Bobby talked about. I actually had the IRS revenue ruling also to bring up, but he's done a great job of covering that. But let me give you an idea of the scale of what we're talking about. The tax credit allocation from the federal government to TDHCA is roughly $65 million per year. That allocation is actually a 10-year allocation. So each allocation is worth $650 million to the Texas building economy, and that's annually. You then have a multiplier with economic benefit, whereby those folks who are working in the construction go out and spend their dollars in the local economy. When you add that multiplier into the factor, you come up with an impact of $800 million annually into the local economies of Texas when an affordable housing development is constructed. So from a scale perspective, we're talking about a program that brings a lot of economic impact, and to see it go away would be detrimental to a lot of these economies that are benefiting from that $800 million of economic impact. Beyond that, one of our tasks as TexCat is to focus on other bills that affect the housing industry. Obviously, Representative Leach, we've seen your bill and we appreciate that. There are some other bills out there that go the other direction, that are diametrically opposed to what you have proposed. And so we're looking at those bills and we're talking to folks about them. We want to make sure that folks understand what the impact is economically and to our workforce. As Bobby said, the folks who live with us are folks that work in our retail and service sectors. A lot of them are in our schools, they're in our emergency services personnel. They are folks that are very important to our economies for them to be able to thrive. And if housing is not available where they can afford to live in a quality development, they end up living in blighted areas, they end up having to live with roommates, they end up in situations that are not healthy living environments for them, for their children, or for our seniors who are on restricted income. So it's important to keep the focus on what we're talking about when we look at all of these bills and the politics that are involved in them. Bobby talked on the IRS revenue ruling, so I'm not going to touch on that. You have a copy of it. It was put out this year. It is specific to the state of Texas, even though they talk about state X. As developers, we spend, and when we prosecute an application, we spend roughly $100,000 putting an application together to the state agency. The amount of due diligence that we have to do to make sure that the sites are appropriate, that the use is appropriate, that all of the necessary regulations and zoning and permitting requirements, we can meet all of them. That's a pretty intense process. And so those applications consist of 300 to 400 pages. And the state agency follows a very regimented QAP process where they evaluate that 300 to 400 pages. Yet, as a legislature, when you are asked to look at a tax credit development, you might get 2 or 3 pages. And so you're looking at something in a very narrow scope that the agency is actually looking at in a very broad scope. And I would argue that it's probably not the proper role of government to be looking under a microscope at 2 to 3 pages of information for something that, in order to participate, we have to generate 400 pages of documentation. So food for thought on that. And finally, I'll close with this industry is one that is critical for our workforce. I know we have a story that I like to tell is of a single mom who works in the medical profession with 3 children. The best she could afford in a market rate community with her 3 boys, teenage sons, was a 2-bedroom apartment. By providing her workforce housing under the affordable program, she was actually able to move into a 3-bedroom apartment. She was in a 2-1, herself and 3 teenage sons. She was able to move into a 3-2 so that each of her sons, she had 2 younger sons that shared, her oldest son had his own room, she had her own room. It improved her quality of life for her, for her children. Ultimately, that's what we're talking about, is improving the quality of life for our citizens. And Bobby mentioned that if we had to get political letters for prisons and for roads, we wouldn't have any. I would suggest we wouldn't have any Walmarts either. This is probably the only real estate development program that I know of that requires us to get a political letter of support. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. And last we have Mr. Ron Williams.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Ron Williams. I'm Executive Director of the Southeast Texas Housing Finance Corporation, SETH for short, which consists of 20 local jurisdictions, 9 counties, and 11 cities in Region 6. I'm a past board member and president of TAAHP. I'm a past board member and officer of TAAHP, and I'm currently the president of the National Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies with our headquarters in Washington, D.C. I'd like to take a brief moment to explain the programs that are administered by local housing finance corporations. Most of the attention has been on our housing programs that are financed with tax-exempt bonds for both multifamily and single-family mortgages. However, we are much more than those two programs, and you must look at the various pieces of legislation that are proposed that directly affects our ability to create workforce housing and create economic activity at the local level. As I stated last year in front of the committee, SETH administers a single-family program that does not use local, state, or federal funds to assist homebuyers whose income does not exceed 115% of the area median income by county. Chairman Alvarado, Representative Elkins, and Representative Johnson. In Harris County alone, over the past 4 years, SETH has provided 2,570 homebuyers with an average annual income of $54,000 with over $364 million in mortgage funds, and most notably have provided those families over $17.8 million in grant funds that do not have to be repaid for down payment and closing costs. Representative Leach, in your area, we have provided 213 homebuyers with $37.2 million in mortgage funds and over $1.8 million in grant assistance. And in Representative Bernal's area, just in Bexar County, we've provided over 1,079 homebuyers with over $144 million in mortgages and $6.8 million in grant funds. And Representative Isaacs, just in Blanco and Hays County, we have provided 45 homebuyers with over $17.2 million in mortgage funds and over $800,000 in grant funds. In total, SETH's Texas Advantage program has provided in the past 4 years $1.6 billion in mortgage funds and over $82 million in grant funds to over 11,395 low and moderate income homebuyers. These funds also roll over at least 3 times in the local area and providing economic activity to the local jurisdictions, to realtors, home inspectors, appraisers, lenders, home builders, and local property taxes. From this program, we've also been able to return over $1.3 million to other local housing finance agencies to administer affordable housing and related services in their local jurisdictions. SETH has transferred over $1 million to our 20 local jurisdictions for the purposes of owner-occupied rehab for extremely low-income seniors, replace failing rural septic tank systems, provide transportation vouchers for low-income seniors, provide handicapped home improvements for disabled veterans, and replacing an aging van to transport disabled veterans to medical services. And these are just a few of the examples. Many local housing finance corporations also administer the Mortgage Credit Certificate Program, which provides up to a $2,000 direct tax credit each year the home buyer lives in that home. This is a direct tax credit on Form 1040 that allows the home buyer to reduce their federal income taxes. Education is one of the most important features of buying a home. Over the past 4 years, SETH has educated 17,400 home buyers, individuals, prior to their home purchase. Studies have shown that home buyers who complete home buyers education courses prior to their purchase have much lower foreclosure rates. Many local housing finance corporations or their affiliates are in the ownership position in multifamily developments throughout our local jurisdictions, either as general partners, managing general partners, special limited partners, landowners, or outright 100% owners. The need for affordable housing is great. and our local leaders look to the local housing finance corporations to fill that need. Whether that means utilizing 9% and 4% tax credit program, the home program, FHA financing, rural housing services, or financing from the local housing finance corporation's general funds. So as you can see, local housing finance corporations play a critical role in our local jurisdictions for creating affordable workforce housing, community services for seniors or veterans, eliminating slum and blight, and provides needed economic activity for the programs we administer. TAAHP's great Executive Director Gene Tallarico and TAAHP's Board of Directors stand ready during the legislative session to provide materials and information to help the legislature make meaningful decisions in the affordable housing arena. Thank you for the opportunity. Happy Mardi Gras. Be safe on Fat Tuesday.
Thank you. Well, I was going to say, let's talk about the big white elephant in the room, but since most of you have touched on the issue and we've had some sidebar conversations about this, about the letters. Boy, I can tell you this week I was really hoping that I wouldn't have to deal with this issue, but these things are due March 1st, and our office has been bombarded by some of you in this room just calling and catching us here and there as we walk around the Capitol. But I know in one instance I've had a situation where I've got 3 or 4 in my district this week competing for the same tax credits. Can you just touch on, for those who maybe are not faced with this situation as often, what that means? Because if you write more than one letter, you're diluting the process. Or some people may say, well, I'm going to write a letter for everybody. I'm not writing a letter for anyone. I'm just going to write a letter for one. And even after you've told people that, they come back, well, but just write one for us. What does that mean?
I'd love to take that question, Madam Chair. So it really gets back to what Lisa was testifying about. I mean, we're pouring through these volumes of rules, and it's good housing policy that your state agency puts together, that they want to see these projects in higher income neighborhoods, or they want to see a concerted revitalization effort if it's not in a higher income neighborhood, and they want to see good schools, they want to see good roads, they want to see access to buses, and we put all these hundreds of pages together for the state agency, and then basically you guys are making the decision based on a white paper from somebody. And so it's not a fair position for you all to be in. All of the state rep letters that I got this year from state reps were saying, okay, Bobby, I'm going to give you this letter, but you're getting us out of this process, right? I don't like this. I don't know enough about your project. I don't know enough about all of these intangibles and all these areas and all these housing policy issues. I just don't know enough about it. And you're greeted with a developer or a developer's representative who you're basically making a decision on. Well, I kind of know that guy. I'm familiar with the neighborhood. I know they need affordable housing. But I don't really even know what you're proposing, what income levels, what support services, what types of amenities. Is it a scaled down project? Is it a scaled up project? And there's good and bad in that too. Is it a waste of taxpayer dollars? Is it not a good enough utilization? I mean, there's like 100 questions for you all to ask, and it's not fair with all of the other things you all are doing at the beginning of session to say, hey, no, I need this right now, and you basically have 30 days. The state takes 4 months to review our applications. They're due on March 1st, and they have to have an official recommendation to their board by July 1st. So you all get 30 days, and they get 4 months. And even if you had the 4 months, would you really want to pour through the whole 400 pages? I mean, I'm a housing expert, and I don't want to pour through my competitors, but you have a state agency full of, building full of employees, and that's what their job is. And basically, when we're doing this, it's almost to the point of like, why do we even have them? Why do we even put the application together? Because it doesn't matter in the end if you didn't support us or if the municipality opposed us. It doesn't matter. All the work was for naught. It's just a completely political animal right now. And I just want to again emphasize, I apologize for my passion about this, but I think our program may be in jeopardy if it's just stripped down to what two elected bodies think.
Can you get to the part of my question about what it means to write one letter, what it means to write a letter for everybody, and how that affects the process?
So there's 3 positions you can take. You can write a letter of support, you can be neutral, or you can oppose. And basically, all other things being equal, if you give everybody a letter, you're just kind of punting to the state agency. But that's only in your district, as you know, Madam Chair. You have other competing projects around your district that like you could take the position like some of your colleagues do. I'm not writing those letters. Well, there's in Houston, for example, it's one region. What do you have? 34 state reps? I mean, there's basically 34 different districts that are all competing for the same allocated money for the city of Houston. So if you sit on the sidelines and say, I don't like the process, I'm going to protest it, well, you basically just said, I'm not taking any tax credit housing and any affordable work housing for my district this year because someone else is probably going to write that letter. And then, so it's just, Yep.
I'm going to jump in and add to that. The money under the tax credit program is broken up into 13 regions across the state, and then it's further broken up into rural and urban. So you have 26 different categories. Each category competes within itself. So to your question, if you choose within Houston, where you have 34 other representatives and you have other municipalities and you have other government agencies, if you choose to stand down from the process, someone will write. And so effectively it creates an area within a region, the 13 regions that Texas has, it creates an area that cannot be successful in competing for workforce housing or to secure any allocation of tax credits. Versus if you write for everyone in your region, you are allowing the state then to take all of their rules, apply them to those applications, go through all 400 pages of every application, and then determine which one best fits the criteria that they've laid out under that guidance. When you choose one application within your district, you are not securing an allocation of funds for that applicant because you may write one, but other representatives may write 3 or 4 or 5, and as long as all of those applications are contained within one region, they then are all competing with one another.
You could be in a position too, Madam Chair, where you write one letter and you wrote the letter for the lowest scoring application for the whole region. So by housing criteria and all of the rules and all of the stuff that the state agency spends a year putting the rules together on, you could be picking what is in essence objectively the worst project just because of some, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, but for whatever reason, sometimes the lowest scoring letter application gets a letter and the highest scoring on the objective criterion doesn't get a letter. So in essence, by these objective criterion, the lowest scoring, the basically worst development can sometimes get funded over the best development that doesn't get funded. So,
and within Seth's jurisdictions, what we've come to is our tax credit developments and affordable housing are being concentrated in one area or two areas because they know where they can get a letter from the representative. And they don't go out in the other areas because those representatives have always said they're not going to do a letter. So a lot of our affordable housing is being concentrated just in one area.
And that's what the IRS ruling is addressing.
That's a big problem. Vice Chair Leach.
Well, I assume that when these bills are referred, we'll have more of a substantive conversation with respect to what the proposed legislation. I know I've filed House Bill 616. There's a number of other bills out there, and I look forward to you coming back and hopefully taking part in that committee hearing. But as an anecdote, my policy has always been, I've been approached a number of times since I was first took office in 2013. I've been approached a number of times by some people, even sitting in this room now. And what I probably the same people, right? And found that we were spending an awful lot of time, I and my staff, in the real estate development business. And I don't know about my fellow members here, but I don't have a full-time staff devoted to analyzing a real estate development project in my district. And so learned very quickly that if I signed one letter, for whatever reason, that I was going to be approached again and again and again, and would have to analyze every project on the merits of the project, taking away valuable time from my real duties, what I view as my real duties as an elected state representative. And so I've been approached, I don't know specifically, but probably 6 to 10 times. And my policy has always been, I'm neutral. I'm not signing letters. In fact, I think my reputation across the state is don't go to Representative Leach. He's not going to sign a letter. And people are wise to take that position because...
Is that your only reputation?
Well, no, I have other reputations too, but that's just the one, that's relevant to this discussion. So, but my district suffers for that because some of these projects are on the merits good projects. In fact, right now, I'm considering one that is specifically aimed at veterans in our community, and my initial proposal or my initial position was I'm neutral, and then I started learning more and more about the project and started getting communications from constituents and veterans groups and city council members and chambers of commerce and realtors, and I realized, well, this project has more community support than the other ones. So I'm over the next 24 hours considering whether I'm going to sign my first letter of support. And we still haven't made our final decision yet, but what my bill has done is just takes us out as state representatives altogether. It does not take out local city councils, and my position, and we can sort through this, my position is we still do need that local input. I've had situations, Madam Chair, on a few of the projects where city councils will vote on resolutions supporting a project, and on 2 specific instances in my district, I'll get a call after the city council votes that night saying, Representative Leach, I just voted to support this project, but we don't want this project, don't sign a letter. And yeah. Which is just evidence of why we need to remove ourselves altogether. I feel strongly that the senators did the right thing in 2013, and we need to follow suit this session. So look forward to having more of a substantive discussion. I invite you back. I know there's going to be some disagreement on this committee, but that's okay. I just wanted you to know that my district is a perfect example of how this has gone wrong and why we need to get us out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. As far as the QAP goes, are there any other modifications that y'all would like to see made?
I think Bobby and I have actually had this conversation, and this is such a major issue for our industry across the board that it is for both of our organizations and all of the developers we represent. This is priority number 1. We have actually agreed, with the exception of maybe the property tax ad valorem bill, to stand down and not request any other changes to the statute related to affordable housing. There are other things that if we had all day we could talk about and we could discuss whether they're good or bad, but this is of such utmost importance that we are not taking on any other legislative agenda for affordable housing.
Yeah, the same holds with TAAHP. This is such a monumental thing. Most of the rules that we're under in the QAP, as you know, Madam Chair, are through rulemaking. Mm-hmm. And so there's a good input. There's around the state roundtables and public hearings for us to participate in. These 2 items are, as you know, identified in the statute that they must be in our QAP. So we have to come to the legislature for relief on this. So.
Okay.
This is our whole agenda.
Putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Chairman Elkins.
Madam Chair, thank you. In my area, like in the cities where you're going to put the cities, a lot of places don't have cities, but there's in my area, but the only thing that we can get approved without lots of community opposition, even though we're not in the city, in the county, is senior citizens, or 55 plus developments where the for the older folks. But there's 2, and then like in the district right next to me where Debbie Riddle used to be and where Valerie Swanson's at now, that community just doesn't want anything to do with it. And over the years, there's 2 events that I prefer that I wish I never had to go to. And there's only one event that's worse than going to affordable housing, and that's a landfill. And believe me, they bring the tar and the feather when they come. And so you think your stuff is bad, landfills are worse. But how can the community have a say when the community, like, for example, like Copperfield, which is in my district, they have an organization called the Copperfield Coalition, and they are just adamantly opposed. In fact, one night I went to an event in Houston a couple years ago. About 400 people showed up. That's a lot of people, every one of them. And I just said, listen, anybody that doesn't live within 2 miles of this project, you kind of don't get a say. Which there was nobody there that was within 2 miles. Everybody was further than 2 miles away. And then they came up and they beat on me and like, wait a minute, you don't understand. Yeah, we may be more than 2 miles away, but we're affected by this. I'm like, how is that? They go, because the government, this is their view, and this is what maybe y'all don't see. They go, the government is taking our tax dollars and using it against us to destroy our neighborhoods. That's how they see it. Now, whether it's right or wrong, the public sees this, and I'm like, look, if you was just a private developer, like you mentioned Walmart a while ago, and believe me, when I look back today and see what Eisenhower was able to do with the highway system in the 1950s, it's nothing more than a miracle to me that we have highways, because we can't even get a high-speed railroad without lots of opposition because it's going across people's property. But the issue is that on Walmart, it's private property and there's no government money. They should be able to do what they want to. And then in cities, thank God in Houston we don't have zoning, but in a lot of cities they do have zoning. So in effect, you do have cities that are telling you what you can and can't do with private property, which is, I'm just fundamentally opposed to. I think if you're going to have property rights, the people ought to do what they want to with their property. But like in our area, if you were going to come in and build that same apartment project without any government money, you would not have to hold any hearings. You would not have to have any public testimony. You just go buy the land, get your architect, and start cutting and turning dirt and building the project. I think that, one of the things that I wish there wasn't, if you're going to have this process, I wish there wasn't the town hall or the public comment involved, because that's what gets the people worked up.
Yeah, if you don't mind me addressing that, Mr. Chair, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm a private property owner. There's some, and some of this is, and I don't know how to solve it because a lot of these people don't want to listen to the facts. But the truth of the matter is, this is just a financing program. It's a tool to build apartments. And the tenants that we're taking under this program, making up to 60% of area median family income, those are generally apartment tenants anyways. That's generally, unless you're doing a high-end kind of condo specialty apartment complex, those are generally the same tenants. So to your point, like, I've never had our city turn one of my deals down. But if they did, I think there's tremendous liability for that city, because wait a minute, if I'm doing this exact same apartment complex, it's zoned, it's identified in your comprehensive plan as this is where we want multifamily housing to go, and I'm doing multifamily housing and it's an apartment complex, well, what could be your basis for turning my application down? Why would you? Because of the financing tool? 90% of our tenants pay their own rent, pay full rent. And I own almost 3,000 units in El Paso County. About 10% of those are getting those HUD Section 8 vouchers, but out of those 10%, more than half of those are paying some rent, and it's just a subsidy to get them over. There's 3 to 4% in my portfolio that are indigent people. A lot of them are handicapped, or they don't have an ability, or they're mentally, ill, or they don't have an ability. And there's a place for those people in this program as well. I don't want to say that it's not for poor people, but generally it's a working class program, and it's pretty much the same as a regular apartment complex I would build. And I don't know how we
get that, but how, like what Representative Leach wants to do, how does the community have a say? Like in a non-incorporated area, in a non-city where it's just county and there's not really a jurisdiction.
It's a private property issue as well. The only way that apartments are going to be built in those kind of counties, in those rural places, I mean, they just don't justify an apartment complex with conventional financing. I mean, it's the only way apartments are going to get built is through this program. It's a tough question. I would tell you, in the municipalities where they do have zoning and they do have comprehensive plans, I mean, there is ample opportunity for local involvement. There's still, even in the counties, there's still a limited development process. There's a we've got to file a plat. We've got to make sure that there's adequate draining and adequate streets and roads and things like that. So there still is some local input on these issues. It's
Part of the issue is, as you mentioned, it becomes an emotional issue. People come and, it's heartfelt concerns that they have. When you look at the reality of this program, both federally and in the state, the foreclosure rate, the failure rate is less than 1%. And if you compare that to the failure rate or the foreclosure rate of conventional apartments, it's much, much higher. So the reality is, there's actually a Harvard study that just came out this last year that talks about the impact of affordable housing developments on their communities. And is it negative, is it neutral, or is it positive? And the results of that study came out and said it's neutral to positive, that there is not a negative impact under today's tax credit program. We're not talking about the subsidized housing that was built in Chicago years and years ago. We're talking about Class A apartments that are financed so that we buy down our mortgage so that we can lower our rent. That's really the only difference between what we build and what a conventional apartment developer builds, is we finance it differently so that we can charge less rent, so that the guy who's working EMS can actually afford to have a place to live.
That's a very good point, and Vice Chair Leach and I were just talking. If you have some backup on that study about the 1%, if you could share that with the committee. Well, drum roll, the moment we've all been waiting for, Representative Isaac.
Yes.
Bobby, I want to thank you. You did mention that this was, I think, tax credit finance, affordable housing. I appreciate you using that term, because I live in affordable housing, and as do, I'd say, probably close to 90% of the people in the state of Texas live in housing that they can afford. Okay. So it's a misnomer when you just talk about affordable housing. I know it's in the name of your association that you're affiliated with, but I do want to point that out, that most Texans do live in affordable housing. It's getting harder and harder every year, especially when the taxes go up. In my county, our valuations increase 12.5%. That hurts. But you mentioned the financing for these apartments. What's the financing mechanism, just real briefly?
So basically, the federal government gives the states this tax credit allocation. The state awards the tax credits on a 9% deal. It generally subsidizes and allows you to only have to finance with a conventional loan something around 25 or 30% of the total project cost. So we still have a mortgage. So for example, like on a $20 million project, we'd have like a $6 million mortgage. Generally, we'd have a funding gap that we fill through the investment that comes from partnering with someone who uses our tax credits for that other $13 or $14 million piece. Generally, developers put a little of their own equity into a deal too.
And then who's buying those credits?
So it's typically, it's C corporations, it's publicly traded corporations, mostly banks.
Have to be a C?
It does have to be a C, unfortunately. In the 1986 tax laws, they took passive losses away from non-C corporations, like doctors and lawyers used to invest in affordable housing back in the 80s, and they closed that tax loophole. So now it's only C corporations and real estate professionals. But that's a very small, like I'm a real estate professional. Okay. You have to, there's a formula the IRS has, something like 95% of your daily activities have to have something to do with selling, managing, and constructing real estate. So it's not just one of those three. So.
Mostly banks. What are the banks doing with them?
So the banks are using it for what's called the CRA credit, which is an acronym for the Community Reinvestment Act.
Okay.
The federal government requires them, and they passed a law that required all the banks to have a proportion of their deposits invested in loaning in these community type of activities. And this is the perfect mechanism for them to use it in. As Lisa said, the foreclosure rate and the default rate on these is less than 1%. So they get credit with the federal government for their CRA scoring as a bank, which I understand happens once every 3 years, where the regulators come in and make sure that their proportion to local deposits is also being reinvested in that community on community reinvestment activities such as affordable housing, but true, low income tenant affordable housing.
Sure. So my understanding was on some of these, the credits, is that corporations, C Corps, were buying them to lower their tax rate.
Correct. The way that the program's set up, it's an IRS program. It's in Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code. And just like most of the Internal Revenue Code, it's filled with, kind of alternates. You can either pay your taxes, Bank of America, for example, or you can take that same money that you would have paid in taxes and invest it in this tax credit activity, in this tax credit. And the tax credit is a one-for-one, it's like a coupon. It's not a deduction. It's
just like a child care credit. If you have a child care credit and you get $500 or whatever it is off of your taxes, the housing tax credit is similar. It doesn't actually lower your tax rate. Your taxes are calculated, you have a tax bill, and then you can use that credit as an offset or a deduction against the amount of the check that you have to write.
Okay.
Right.
So you're
That's a good
writing a
analogy.
check into the housing project as opposed to writing a check to the federal government for them to decide how to use it.
So that would be more advantageous than just writing a check to a 501c3 to lower your tax.
Right, that's a deduction. And they still do get some deductions from the losses and the depreciation in this development scheme as well.
Okay.
But a credit is much, much more valuable than what you're talking about as a deduction, because a deduction is a reduction of your income before it goes into determining what your taxes are. And like Lisa said, this credit comes in at the end. You put your income in, multiply it by the rate, and at the end you're owed this, then you get to literally subtract through what's called an 8609 is the IRS form that we submit to our our investors every year. And then they just submit that 8609 with their tax return. They say, I owed $1 million, but I have $100,000 in tax credits, so here's my 8609 and my check for the other $900,000.
Could they potentially, if they owe $1 million, have $1 million in tax credits?
Yeah, I think what I've heard is, these banks are so big, and the program is large. Like Lisa said, it's almost $1 billion for the state of Texas. It still doesn't come close to what these C corporations and their tax burden is every year. I'm not aware of any bank that's able to, subtract all of their entire tax burden away with investing in Section 42 credits.
So
And a lot of the companies that are in this business are actually for-profit. I would say the majority of them are actually for-profit. So you take that reduction in taxes that are paid to the federal government, you invest it into the local economy. We then are for-profit companies that are generating income that then have taxable income that is created via their investment. So it becomes a repetition of income generation.
And as opposed to, again, I'm a conservative businessman, I would much rather see, we're cutting out the middleman in this. They're not sending money to the federal government for the federal government to send to HUD or wherever and then peel off 83 cents of every dollar and then 17 cents gets to the actual intended tenant. This is just directly infused into the development. There's very little, if the only real involvement from the federal government is the IRS. HUD sets our income limits and our rents every year, but they're just extrapolating data and presenting it and publishing it. The IRS is basically it. And it's so good, purely as a government program, because there's so little, the oversight is basically the CPAs that are watching these corporations. They come out and they give their own inspections of our properties. We have inspections from TDHCA and we have inspections from the HUD agency if we're taking Section 8 vouchers, which we have to. But then the other level of inspection is from the private lender and the private tax credit investor. So to your point, Representative Elkins, about what's the difference between this and four-market apartment complexes, I would submit to you that after 10 years or 15 years, you drive through our community, you're going to see the nicest apartment complexes in this program. And the rundown ones that don't have this incentive to keep them up are more the conventional ones than the tax credit ones.
And one of the things I have a note here is I want to learn a little bit more about the HUD vouchers that you mentioned, because some of the concern that I have is these corporations are buying down, they're decreasing their tax burden, which we have a tax burden. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We need roads, we need schools, we need funding, and we have a tax burden. And when these more profitable industries and companies and wealthy individuals find ways to buy down their tax burdens, it gets pushed down to those of us that are paying the taxes. It's the same with tax-exempt properties not paying into school districts. Then that burden gets pushed to those that are paying the burdens, that are paying the taxes, and that impacts the least among us more than anyone else. And so those are just some of the concerns I have, but I have some learning to do, and I will keep an open mind. But
could I give you some feedback on that?
Absolutely.
Representative? So I mean, again, you're a Republican, I'm a conservative businessman, and I think that the federal government is always going to be involved in the provision of affordable housing in this country. I think there's always going to be some government program. And if there's going to be some government program, this is so much better than Bank of America paying more in taxes and giving it to HUD. It's so much more efficient. I mean, I'm a user and a developer. I mean, I'm a small businessman. It's me and my brother, and we build 200 homes in El Paso a year. We do about 200 of these units every year. But I'm a homegrown. I'm running a tight ship, and we run a very efficient program. I mean, I can tell you, in our community, the Public Housing Authority, they did a development a couple of years ago that they were bragging about. They got some HUD award. It was $350 a square foot. This program, we're never much more over $105, $110 a square foot. Is the most expensive one we've ever done. So if the government's going to be involved in affordable housing and the provision of that anyways, wouldn't we want one that's 200 or 300 times more efficient than the HUD machine that the federal government, that's the alternative to that?
And the investment does stay in the community. Yes, they're reducing their tax burden in what they're paying to the IRS, but they're actually writing a check into the local community when they write the check to that development. So it's not a function of that money, they're reducing their taxes and poof, it's gone, it goes away. It actually becomes investment in the local economy, which then is an economic generator.
There are some small exceptions where nonprofits and housing authorities are do these developments, and they're part of this process, but by and large it's probably 80-85% private developers like myself, and we're not exempt from paying property taxes, and we're not exempt from paying sales taxes. So it goes into the local community, and it is paying its fair share on the local level. It's just at that federal level, which is an alternative for those investors to paying tax.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I know we're going to have a lot of discussion on this topic, and it's going to be an issue that doesn't even fall within partisan lines. But I know some of the bills out there, had many conversations with Vice Chair Leach, are only taking the representatives out of the process and allowing the local elected officials, city council. I know that's an issue that folks in some unincorporated areas have. I particularly don't want to tell local city council members whether or not they can stay in or out. I think that's a local decision. But I'm looking forward to this discussion. I think you've broken it down to a very plain and simple term on the credits. And what I've seen before in some of these developments, and I'll just brag a little bit about New Hope Housing in Houston, in my district, but they are some of the most accountable, responsible owners of apartments, because they know that people are watching. They know that if there's any sign of mischief, of crime, of drug activity, of graffiti, of deterioration, they will be called on it. And I like that accountability. If it's a regular apartment multifamily unit, but the owner's in California or out of state somewhere, good luck. Good luck getting something done. So I know we're going to have a healthy debate on this. I thank all of you for your time and your advocacy on. Sure, Chairman Elkins.
I need just two questions, and I'll throw them out and let y'all answer. On that 9%, the example you gave was 20 million to 6 million. Where I went to school, that was a lot more than 9%. So you end up you got about a 70% reduction based on that example. What is reality?
Okay, so now we're really getting into the weeds, Chairman Elkins, but it's, so the 9% is referring to 9% of your eligible basis, which is a little less than the total project development cost. So let's say it's a $20 million project, 9% of your costs are what's called eligible basis, basically deductible expenses, not land and not a few other things.
Depreciable assets.
Depreciable assets, right. So you take 9% of your depreciable basis, and so like Lisa said, that's a 10-year credit that they give you up front. So basically it's not 9%, it's 90% of your...
9% per year.
It's
Yes,
9%
sir.
per year, yes sir. And so then you take that to the private equity markets, and like right now, equity pricing might be 90 cents.
Okay.
So now you've got 80% of your depreciable basis. So
Okay.
on a $20 million, but there's probably $2 million on a $20 million project of non-depreciable. So
Okay. No. You mentioned that in that $20 million example that you basically have about a $6 million note.
correct.
So are the rents based upon amortizing that $6 million, or are they based
Exactly.
on amortizing the $20 million?
The six.
Exactly, the 6.
Then the taxing authority, how are they valuing that based on the rents of $6 million, or are they basing that based on the value of $20 million?
So your colleague, Senator Van Taylor, I believe, has filed a bill today that will specially treat this class of asset. We're the only asset class in the state of Texas that is rent capped. Other states have all kinds of different things where there's price caps and things. We're rent capped. It's part of the federal program. So it's a fight every year to try to get the local taxing entities to understand that basically, like you said, on an income approach with a cap rate, and you're determining value under the income approach, this is our income, these are our expenses, this is our net operating income, here's the cap rate, this is the value. And Senator Taylor's, and it's a coalition bill that we've worked with the central appraisal districts and the tax credit developers, because we're basically at odds in litigation all the time with each
I
other.
got you. And I know every community is going to be different because land values and construction cost is going to vary from place to place. But as a general rule, like in El Paso, what is a typical unit? Like I guess is a typical apartment 2-bedroom, 2-bath, or?
Yeah, probably 2.5 bedrooms and 1.5 baths is probably the typical.
And that's probably what, about 1,100 square feet?
Right, about 1,000 square feet, right, 1,100 square feet.
And what is the unit cost?
So the unit cost will be, just the hard construction costs will generally be about $65,000 or $70,000 a unit.
So that's going to, so on a $70,000 project, I can use round numbers, that's going to be about $2,100 a year in property taxes.
Right.
But
we're still arguing, and we're going off your other theory to get. I think to get to the answer to your question, my properties are on the tax rolls at about $30,000 per unit. Is how it works out.
So there's two options for valuing either income approach or replacement cost approach. The $65,000 construction cost would be replacement cost approach. As an affordable housing developer, if we were to pay taxes based on replacement cost, we don't have enough rental income to cover that expense. These properties would go broke. And so the statute actually allows for affordable housing properties to be assessed on the income that we generate. And so as long as we're generating income under the affordable provisions, we have capped rents and we have restricted rents, we're eligible to be taxed under the income approach as opposed to the replacement cost approach.
Why are you always in litigation?
Because the assessors consistently want to assess us on the replacement approach, and we have to go in and make our case for the income approach.
Right.
They can't do that, but they do that. And so consistently we are
We
filing,
always win.
we are filing a lawsuit and negotiating what our valuation is, which is why that is the other bill that we have on our plate this year.
But you have to pay up front and then you
And then you fight.
But doesn't the state, like oh man, I never can remember all these acronyms, state, the Texas Department of Housing or
TDHCA.
TDHCA, they have a list of all these projects. Can't
They
they
do.
just submit them to all the appraisals?
They do. They don't care.
Okay, I got you.
It depends
Okay.
on the appraisal.
It does. It's a local jurisdiction issue, and it's specific to the appraiser that you happen to be dealing with.
Okay,
God, that's terrible.
got it.
Yeah.
I know how to solve that problem.
You have a bill for that?
No, but I just, I mean,
Somebody has a bill for that.
Senator Taylor does,
Yes.
and we'd love to have all
And it
of
was
you
just
as
filed
co-sponsors.
today,
Yes, ma'am.
coincidentally.
Yes, ma'am.
On the example you were giving of a typical project in El Paso, what is a rent range?
So my average rent is $650 a month. We do this analysis every year, and we're right at $650 a month. And
And a non-tax credit.
a non-tax credit for the same. It would maybe be 760, 780, somewhere in there for the same type of location, similar, everything else the same. It'd be maybe 20% more.
And that's very specific to the location in the market, what
Right.
that
Madam Chair.
spread is between market and affordable.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you. Going back to you saying on the rent caps that you guys are dealing with, when you're dealing with some of the senior citizen complexes that are out there, what does that mean, rent cap? That you can only go up so many dollars over so many years? Because you have how many? I'm sure you have some kind of cost of increase over the years because the valuation of the property goes up.
Right. This is where HUD actually does come into the program. So they take and they analyze the data for a local. Everything is predicated on area median family income, and for example, in El Paso, that's 46,000, and it's a published number every year. So then they'll take 60% of that, and then take 30% of that, and that's basically how they determine the rent. And so every year through the American Community Survey, they do a 5-year census, and they determine for every locale, every area of the country, what the area median family income is. And once they publish that, then the rents follow. The program
Happens every year.
every year.
And
Yes,
we're
sir.
not guaranteed any kind of a CPI increase. So if you have a small community and a major employer goes out of business and the income for that community goes down, we can actually see that our rents go down, that we have to reduce the amount of rent that we're charging. It's not predicated on what our expenses are. It's not predicated on being able to cover our debt. It is predicated on what the income of that community is, and it's published annually, and we are capped. That is our maximum rent that we are allowed to charge, and it's published by family size and by bedroom size.
Were we still saying that that's an annual increase that can happen?
It's an annual increase that can happen, but it's also something that can decrease.
But yeah, I guess the question that I'm asking is because there was a particular senior citizen complex in my area, and there are a lot of seniors, and I haven't, in all honesty, I haven't looked to see to look and see how much rent has gone up. But many of the seniors are complaining because the area is growing a little bit, and so you're obviously getting new homes that are coming in, but you have a lot of seniors that are on fixed income, but their rent continues to go up, but they're not getting a cost of living increase per their retirement or SSI, whatever the case may be, but yet they're being almost priced out of their own home that they got into in the first place because rent continues to go up because the area continues to grow. And I'm not quite sure how that is absolutely fair to this senior citizen who does not have the ability or has very limited ability to increase their income to keep up with the actual demand of the rents of the apartment complex.
So one of the, and I don't know the particular property that you're looking at, whether it is a tax credit property, but it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the tax credit properties do is they look at what is 30% of 60% of area median income. There are also different levels of affordability. So there are some units that are going to be affordable at 50% and some units that are affordable at 30%. So as median income increases, if a senior finds themselves in a different bracket, meaning that they were at the 60% of income, but because incomes have gone up, they're now at the 50% of income, there is some shifting that can be done. But there's not a federally mandated cap on rent increases. There is only the HUD guidance on this is the maximum you can charge. Generally what...
No, there is now, Lisa. Under the hold harmless agreement that came
Oh,
out
you're
of
right.
Bureau.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
I was
sorry.
gonna address that. They're actually
Go ahead.
but there's this problem that you have used to be exacerbated greatly. And I don't know the exact facts, but in the HERA Act and the 2009 financial crisis, this is one of the things that got addressed. It used to be like if you have a growing community and the median family income went from $30,000 to $60,000, like in 2 years, well, rents doubled because it's just a function of what they're. But under the hold harmless agreement that the IRS and that HUD put in place, there is now a ceiling. I'll get you that information and I'll get you that white paper, Representative Johnson, because I don't want to shoot from the hip, but I believe the rent ceiling from year to year is about 5%. But the trade-off for that is that the gross rent can never go lower from one year to the next. But like Lisa said, the rents can still go lower in a stagnant community because we have to subtract utility allowances every year from that formula. And utility allowances have never gone down. And that's one thing, that always goes up every year. So if our rents are frozen, our gross rents, and the utility allowance increases, then our net rents that we charge the tenant actually does still go down. But there is a ceiling, and
there is a cap then,
yes,
so
sir.
You can go up no matter what how the median income goes up, you still have a cap. You can't just simply double in
Correct.
1 year.
Yes,
but the developers also have to look at what the market is. We have several rural areas, like Representative Elkins is in, where the tax credit rent is higher than the market. And so we can't charge $650, which is the tax credit rent, because market's only $550. And so there's the other scenario as well.
Sure. Thank you.
And I will get you that information, Representative.
Great. Any more questions? Thank you. Appreciate your testimony, and we look forward to working with you. The Committee on Urban Affairs stands adjourned.